Young people in North Africa are unlikely to befriend, date, or marry someone from sub-Saharan Africa. This revelation was made in the One Africa report, which unpacks narratives about Pan-Africanism and continental integration. The research interviewed 4,500 people aged between 18 and 35. Let's get deep into it. We're joined by Lerato Mokgwatle, Narrative Change Organization for Africa No Filter, and they were heavily involved with this research. So let's talk about this One Africa report. How was it conducted and what were you looking for?
Firstly, let me just explain that Africa No Filter is a narrative change organization that work through research, supporting storytellers and disruption campaigns. So as part of our work to understand what informs narratives about Africa and most importantly, how to shift them meaningfully, we research experiences around Africa, perceptions, what are the attitudes, what are young people saying, and so on. So for this one, we wanted to understand what do young people think about the idea of One Africa, of a united Africa, of continental integration, but most importantly, of some of what it really takes that might be considered soft powers that would make continental integration possible. So we wanted to find out, what do you think about personal relationships with other Africans? What do you think about other Africans? What do you hear about Africa? Where do you get your stories about Africa? And so on.
And the countries that you did this research in?
We interviewed millennials and Gen Zers in South Africa, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Uganda, Morocco, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Namibia, and Egypt.
Right. So we want to know what people think about the concept of One Africa, and to be able to do that, what kind of stories are they hearing about themselves that they say?
Corruption is the most common story that young Africans know about the continent, and that in itself is quite shocking, but research that we did in the beginning of the year showed that a third of the stories that Africans read about Africa from the African media is sourced from foreign news sources. And we know that those tend to typically really focus on news that frames Africa through corruption, disease, bad leadership, conflict, and so on. And so the story of corruption is the one that is told and repeated over and over again across the continent in mainstream media, and so that's what young people know.
Is that far off, though, from what people are going through? So we are the youngest continent in terms of population, but it is the young people of the African continent that we find, okay, more so we do, migrate within the continent, but there are some people who still make perilous journeys outside of the continent because of the cost of corruption.
Absolutely, and I really like that you brought that point. In fact, Africans are moving more within Africa than outside of the continent. So that tells you about what migration trends are in Africa. And secondly, the report found that the young people say that they believe, about 71% believe that they would be welcome to live in another African country. And on the flip side of the negative news they hear about corruption and xenophobia, what they hear most positively about other African countries is that people are friendly and welcoming and that there are great business opportunities. So I think what One Africa shows us is that it creates a window to have a dialogue about Africa, perhaps that goes beyond just the usual stereotypes, beyond just everyday breaking news, right? Beyond what we would know just consuming media or news media in particular.
You talk about breaking stereotypes. I'm so curious to find out what people in North Africa think about where they are placed, right? Do they believe that they're part of the continent?
We interviewed young people in Egypt and young people in Morocco, and we are not at all saying that the study is representative because Africa is 54 countries and North Africa is quite expansive. So we're just engaging in conversations with some young people in that country. And it was quite interesting that there's a cultural disconnect. And beyond that cultural disconnect, in Egypt in particular, young people there, a vast majority wouldn't even consider inter-ethnic relationships.
Francophone versus Anglophone, maybe not versus, but Francophone, Anglophone Africa, what did we find there?
No difference at all. know, the people, our sample didn't particularly think there was a vast difference, didn't think any more or less of the other, except in Morocco, which is a Francophone country. And in Morocco, you know, the finding was that the data that came out was that they believe that there's a disconnect, and that the disconnect favors Anglophone more.
What is the overarching message that you found with some of the stories that these young people told you?
The overarching message is that one Africa is possible, right? And it is in fact already in action, and maybe we're not seeing it in a way that we might expect. But the fact that, for instance, a majority of young people in Ivory Coast have friends from other African countries. In fact, the very fact that even 62% of South Africans that we interviewed think positively of other Africans, those are points of conversations that we can start engaging with deeply, and then from there build on what narrative we can collectively create about Africa. And the one that I'm particularly interested in is one where we are not necessarily regarding each other with suspicion. We think of each other positively. We think it's a positive thing when someone from a different country comes into mind, and vice versa. And also that young people have adventurous curiosity about the continent. They want to travel the continent. They want to have relationships with people from different parts of Africa.
How do we stimulate that at a higher level? I mean, in terms of, so when you want to travel the continent as an African, you must admit, you know this more than anybody. It's expensive, sometimes a little bit more difficult. So these young people who want to interact with other people from other parts of the continent, what kind of policy direction change can your data then bring?
The most important one is to look at barriers and perceptions. The barrier that we know for a fact is visas, prohibitively expensive, and often it's easier to travel outside of the continent in terms of connection. If you want to go to Sao Tome and Principe, for instance, your choice is to either go to Libreville, to go to Accra, or go from Portugal, from Lisbon, right? So the issue of connection is a hindrance, but most importantly, the issue of access. There has always been talk. Visas must fall. Africans must be able to travel freely within the continent, and I think that is going to be such a big step, if nothing else. If it's easier for me to pick up my passport now and arrive in Thailand, for instance, it should be just as easy for me to do the same when I want to go to Chad, when I want to go to Libya, when I want to go to any part of the continent, and so on.
What did people say about South Africa?
South Africans believe, most importantly, young South Africans believe that it's positive to have Africans from other African countries living in the country, and Southern Africans in general showed great curiosity about the continent. I believe they were the most traveled demographic that we spoke to.
Interesting. Thank you very much for the work that you do. Let's continue to have these stimulating conversations about ourselves and change the perceptions. Lerato Mokgwatle, Narrative Change Organization for Africa No Filter. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.